Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to ISRA podcast. Today we'll be talking about Islamic psychology and its importance and relevance for our time. And Islamic psychology has been in the limelight these days as a solution to growing mental health issues within the Muslim community, but also there's a growing or noticeable mental health issues around the world, especially in developed countries. So this is where culturally and religiously sensitive solutions to mental health becomes relevant and important. So we've got here today Hanan Dover, clinical and forensic psychologist and a lecturer on Islamic psychology at Charles University. Welcome, Hanan. And we've got Associate Professor Zuleyha Keskin, Associate Head of School at Center for Islamic Studies at Charles University, and Zuleyha is an expert in Islamic spirituality. So welcome, Zuleyha.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with the first question for Hanan, over to you. What are the problems or issues, the way mental health is addressed in the Muslim world today?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to identify that mental health and Islamic psychology, we were pioneers as Muslims in that particular area. We've got a lot of classical scholarship and information about mental health and also mental well-being and wellness, but we've lost our way. So today what we see is that there is an entrenched stigma associated with mental health, which is unlike our tradition. And when you've got unnecessary stigma associated with mental health, you've got misinformation, misunderstanding, and that also comes with a lot of cultural norms and societal norms that may perpetuate the stigma. And so what we're trying to do is find ourselves once again as a Muslim community within the Muslim world and kind of reclaim how we understand mental health by introducing education, awareness, because when we don't do that, we have what we have today, where Muslims are falling back on what they know. At the moment, we fall back on, if we feel emotional distress or psychological distress or spiritual distress, we tend to blame the jinn or black magic or some supernatural cause because that's what they know. So we have a responsibility to our community, to the Muslim world, to bring forward Islamic psychology or Islamic understandings of mental health so that we can alleviate suffering also.
Okay, so there's a bit of a tendency to explain mental health issues with religious understandings or interpretations rather than seeing it as real health issue. And there's also a stigma. So what's the stigma there?
Well, the stigma is in the most popular one, that if you're experiencing mental health issues, it kind of equates to lack of faith. And this is a very dangerous and harmful belief to hold, because anybody can experience mental health issues, because we've got physical health issues. We also have mental health issues. But so when we align or mental health issues associated with a lack of faith, this will prevent an individual who has emotional distress from seeking support. They'll be further isolated and judged, and they will also not be able to access the necessary treatment, which is evidence-based, or treatment that's in line with our spiritual wellness as well. So we need to be looking at mental health from a holistic, integrated framework, which is what Islam actually provides.
Zuleyha, what do you think about that? Do you agree with that? Would you like to add anything?
I agree. I definitely see that having, there's this, affiliation of mental health and lack of faith within our community, sadly. And this then becomes a problem because people don't want others to think that they've got low faith. No, most people want to be good Muslims. They want to be faithful Muslims, faithful to Allah. And so it therefore then makes it very difficult for this to be talked about amongst people, their mental health issues. And it makes it difficult for them then to also seek help. And also, I guess, my experience with the community is also when you say go see a psychologist or a therapist, a common response is, I'm not crazy. Sadly, there's this association with, seeing a mental health therapist with, you're crazy, which is not true.
Okay. I guess that sort of comes from the thinking that religion helps you spiritually, and it helps you mentally as well to some extent, I guess, and that if you were to be religious or strong in your faith, you shouldn't be having serious mental health problems. I guess that's the assumption that people have. So that raises a question that, I guess, where does the role of religion start and stop in helping an individual from a mental health perspective? And where does it stop, and then the health system or the mental health aspects come in?
Okay, well, that's where Islamic psychology enters, because Islamic psychology is a discipline that looks at human nature, and obviously we look at it from the basis of what Islam tells us about our makeup, our spiritual, biological, psychological wellness and well-being and overall worldview. We have the Quran and Sunnah that helps us understand who we are as human beings, and from there we can actually look at different ways of understanding ourselves, whether it's from a mental health perspective, whether it's our day-to-day lives working, whether it's from education and so forth. So I think that when we look at Islamic psychology as a discipline that helps us understand our essence, okay, from the framework of fitrah, which is our innate capacity to understand and obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have to attempt in our daily lives to not deviate or alienate ourselves from our fitrah, because when you alienate yourself from your fitrah, there is that psychological schism, where you might have spiritual distress, you might have psychological distress, you also may have physical distress. So there's a huge interconnectedness in understanding who we are as human beings. And then when you kind of journey into the health aspect, that's where all the evidence-based understandings and psychological theories come into play. But you cannot devoid or divorce Islamic understanding of human nature or spirituality from the discipline of psychology. And then you extend into the professional, practical or applied space, which is the psychology, the mental health professional space. So you don't have to be a mental health professional to understand yourself as a human being. You do need to understand Islamic psychology. I'm very biased. I do believe everybody should study Islamic psychology, and then you take it as far as you need to.
Yeah, we'll come to that more. But what do you think, Zuleyha? Where does spirituality or religion start, stop, and where does the mental health treatment comes in?
Look, this is so overlapping. I'll be honest. When I started my writing my PhD, I was of the view, this is going back about 10 years, that if someone has strong faith, that they shouldn't have any mental health issues. That's how I started it. And then afterwards, probably after writing it, I realized that that's not the case. Especially when you're talking about things like trauma or, which I'm not a psychologist, Hanan could speak to this more, but OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder and so forth. Faith is important, but it requires more than faith to be able to deal with these kind of challenges. So I guess I'm at the point where I think spirituality, Islamic spirituality can definitely help in that journey, and it's a big part of it. But it's hard to say where one stops and where one starts, because there's such a huge overlap between the two.
Okay, I'd like to, sometimes analogies help us understand sort of complex things. So I sort of think of this as, let's say, from a physical health perspective, when you have the good nutrition and exercises, when you practice those things, it keeps you healthy, makes you fit, and but once you get sick, then you have to go to hospital. You have to get doctor's treatments. Like, no amount of exercise is going to help you. In a similar way, Islamic spirituality, or I'm talking about the everyday practice of an individual practicing their salat, their prayers, the other aspects of religion. So that can keep them healthy mentally, spiritually. But if things go wrong and you get a spiritual virus somewhere and you just start getting mental illness, you just need treatment, right? Our personal practice of religion is not sufficient to address those serious issues. Yeah?
It's important to understand that not all...
Would you agree with that
I do
analogy?
agree with that analogy, but I also agree with the it's important to understand the holistic interplay of all the different factors associated with mental health or mental illness, because a lot of the times mental health issues have a neurobiological, a genetic basis, a lifestyle basis. It could be nutrition as well, could be environmental, could be family. So we have to understand that Islamic spirituality is important in Islamic psychology and mental health, understanding mental health and also mental illness, because it gives a framework for a Muslim who believes in their faith, a grounded perspective of understanding themselves. But we also have to be cognizant that the reasons for developing mental health issues, most often may not be related to their spirituality. But spirituality is there to help them as a buffer, And sometimes when you do have mental health issues, so you might have significant depression, or OCD, you need to accept that this is qadar, qada and qadar. You have to accept that this is a condition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to you at this point in time. And we know there's many teachings from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he encourages and advocates to seek treatment. So we need to look at a treatment from a holistic perspective and not shy away from also evidence-based treatments at the expense of solely relying on spirituality. Spirituality is helpful. It's who we are as human beings. We can use spiritual resources like dhikr, gratitude, humility, things that are related to our character and akhlaq. Okay, but we also need to be able to access evidence-based treatments, and even treatments that are not evidence-based but were introduced to us by classical Islamic scholarship in order to help our day-to-day functioning. Because you only have a psychological disorder or mental illness if you have a condition that disrupts your day-to-day functioning, because we want to be able to function. And if there's an element of dysfunction, it may require you to perform a lot more dhikr in order for you to be mindful. So mindful is a modern concept. We have concepts that are related to our tradition, such as khushu', in your prayers when making dua, when speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We also have contemplation, tafakkur and tadabbur. We also have muhasaba, in the introspection, to hold ourselves to account as well. We've got these spiritual principles, but we also need to make sure that we understand ourselves using current knowledge to have eventually better mental health outcomes.
Okay, you mentioned some really good examples of, I guess, Islamic practices or teachings where it can help you deal with problems of life, which could be at the basis of some depression or not always, but sometimes. So it can really help you not get into that depressive state. You mentioned about modern psychology. I always wanted to ask this to someone who's got a psychological background. In that, one of the Muslims generally think that psychology discipline is spiritless, like it doesn't take into account human spirit. Is that true? If true, what is the limitation of that?
Well, it is true. Modern psychology is a secular science, and it looks at it's a discipline of human behavior, cognitions, and emotions. However, remembering it's a secular science, it still would allow you to integrate spirituality, although it doesn't put it as in any senior or any central position. On the contrary, Islamic psychology is very inclusive in that it incorporates metaphysical science, spiritual science.
Yeah, but there's a difference. Like someone could say that you can be a spiritual person without necessarily accepting the existence of a spirit, actual spirit to human nature.
Yes.
I guess that's what.
So that's
what
true.
I'm talking.
So this is where spirituality is not devoid of understanding psychology in Islamic for Muslims in Islamic psychology. So it's actually central. I know in modern day psychology you've got New Age spirituality, where it could mean anything. You could be very spiritual with the earth and nature, your family and events and places. Whereas in Islam you cannot have spirituality that's devoid of the Quran and Sunnah. You can't have Islamic psychology that's also devoid of the Quran and Sunnah. So the way we understand spirituality is part and parcel of the organized religion. Okay, so we don't take spirituality out. In essence, when we understand Islamic psychology, it's on the basis of our ethics and morality and how we understand ourselves as Allah has informed us in the Quran and Sunnah. So that's our basis, and everything then is, we can apply many different theories, we can apply many different disciplines as long as it does not contradict the Quran and Sunnah, which is why Islam is inclusive.
Well, Zulaiha, what do you think about that? Like, does exclusion of spirit limit mental health discipline, or inclusion of the spirit, can it liberate it or bring new insights?
It definitely would limit it, I guess, particularly for Muslims, since spirituality or God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is such a central part of who they are. To not have that as part of their, I guess, strategy in dealing with their issues or overcoming them, it's like taking the spirit out of life. And without the spirit, there's no life. So when you're talking about psychology without spirituality, having said that, no doubt there would be benefits, because there would be some strategies there to help them. But certainly bringing Islam into it, or bringing Islamic spirituality into it, takes it to another level. It's a way of life. Islam is a way of life. So then they're able to really embrace what's being said, the strategies that are being offered, because they're so familiar. Like Hanan mentioned, things like sabr, patience, shukr, gratitude. These, most Muslims would know what these are. These are important practices for Muslims.
Can I add, in the clinical space? So in the clinical space, you'll find many Muslim psychologists, who understand their religion very well, will incorporate spirituality in the delivery of our psychological services. You could be also a clinical social worker or mental health professional, because that is something that is important to the client's, a Muslim client's narrative. And that's why we're trying to bring back Islamic psychology, because we find that when we practice, when we introduce an Islamic flavor to our treatment interventions, Muslim clients are more receptive. Remove Islam, you're not giving them the best treatment. And when
I guess we are conflating some of we're bringing religion into its spirituality, spirit. These are different aspects of the discussion here. If I may just maybe try to clarify something like this, either human spirit exists or it doesn't, right? If it exists and that modern psychology is not taking that into account, it would be making a huge mistake, right? You're ignoring an essential part of human nature. If it doesn't exist, but you take into account a spiritual side to human nature, you're still not losing anything. Yeah. So either way, not taking the spirit into account is damaging and limiting of mental health space and the psychological space, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's based on the human experience. So even in secular psychology, whilst they may not believe in a God science infused in the discipline of psychology, it's still inclusive, to be fair to secular science. Because spirituality, cultural codes, language, society, politics is part of the human experience, it won't discount it, but it will not put spirituality give it its central focus in psychology. Over 200 years ago, yes, psychology used to be the science of the soul. But modern psychology has removed the soul, or removed spirituality from its discipline. In a way,
it's become positivistic, and
yes,
religion's completely removed and went to the other extreme.
Yeah, so it can look at values and virtues, but it's not God-centered. So if you look at positive psychology, when you say...
All right, let's hold on to that, because I guess the reason I'm sorry, apologize for if I cut you off there. But I guess I want to come to some conclusions, or I guess points that we can take away. Let's try to draw a distinction between what Islamic psychology is, right? Can you give me 3 things? And this goes to you as well, Zulaiha. What makes Islamic psychology distinctive from other forms of psychological disciplines?
Okay, so Islamic psychology is...
1, 2, 3, kind of.
Quran, Sunnah, and worldview. the human nature worldview. I mean, because that's what
But
distinguishes.
everything, you can throw everything, Quran, Sunnah, to everything.
No, but in
Like,
Islamic psychology-
what's it in Quran and Sunnah that makes it distinct?
What human nature, understanding ourselves and our philosophy of life, our prophetic practices, because that's the ideal Muslim. In today's society, in modern psychology, we look at the bell curve and understanding what is normal. As Muslims, we look at the prophetic character as what is normal. How do we achieve best character? We have to see and read and understand the life of the Prophet, for example.
Okay, I guess the focusing on the Prophet as a role model gives us a standard
Yes, that's right.
human model which is distinctly Islamic.
Which is ethics,
And
morality,
then,
virtues.
Yeah, you could people can judge themselves to that standard. It's
Yes.
like measuring something. If you don't measure, you can't
Yes.
know what it is, right? So that's great. That's number one. What was the other one you mentioned?
I talked about fitrah,
That's the
human
Sunnah
nature.
part.
Yeah, I
What's
talked
the
about human
Quran part?
nature. Understanding human nature from an
Okay.
Islamic perspective.
Okay.
That's key. Because alienation from the fitrah, is going to disconnect you from God. So it's God-centered. Everything that we do. So when we look at the three levels of the nafs,
All right, can we stop there? I want to pass that to... Okay, so we've identified the ideal role model of the Prophet ﷺ as a distinctive aspect of Islamic psychology. Second one is Islamic conceptualization of human nature is different or distinctive. What is different about it, Zuleyha?
With the fitrah?
Is human nature in
nature.
Islam, how is that different to the
I guess
sciences or other forms?
in Islam, the fitrah has a particular inclinations that is identified and recognized, and that is to believe in God and to worship God, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
But
So-
that's belief. Like, what's about human nature?
it's positive. It's innately positive, good, pure. It's different to original sin, for example. It's different to modern understandings of human nature. And our understanding of human nature is purely from our theology.
Yeah. So what is
when
that
you
human
say-
nature?
but when you say it's-
like spirit,
No, but
the
it's
body.
you have what is it as
Yeah.
in it's who you are, but your fitrah is what you're inclined to do. So
The
that's
spirit
what
is
we're
ruh. Spirit is ruh.
I'm not
Aql is
asking.
mind.
Sorry, I'm not asking for that. I'm asking the human nature. Like, what are the parts to human nature that Islam looks at?
Okay,
So we talked about spirit, right?
Yeah.
There's
So what
different
aspects to it?
faculties, but
Yeah.
when you say the fitrah, you don't. Everything makes up your fitrah. I would say the fitrah is most connected with the spirit, the ruh, because it's the ruh that is also yearning to, to connect with Allah. The ruh comes from Allah, returns to Allah, but you've also got things like the heart, the nafs that Hanan mentioned. So all of these need to be aligned
And
with
cognition.
and cognition,
emotions, all of
aql,
that. Yeah.
intellect. So all these have to be aligned and have to work for the fitrah to achieve what it wants,
Okay,
which
great.
is to worship Allah.
Great. I guess that's what I was hoping to get to. So basically, the way Islam conceptualizes human nature is that we have a physical body, but an aql, an entity that gives us the intellect, the mental powers. We've got a spiritual side that is kind of deep, the heart that you mentioned, the qalb. And then there's something called nafs, right? Which is which is
but-
an entity that this is quite distinctive to other
They're
ways of
important.
conceptualizing human
Yeah.
nature.
They're all important faculties, but in the hadith that talks about the fitrah, our Prophet, peace be upon him, says everyone is born upon the fitrah of a we say upon the fitrah, he says, and a lot of the time that's translated as upon the fitrah of a Muslim, that you're born as a Muslim. So it's the fitrah is someone who is surrendering, submitting to Allah. It's like your innate disposition. The faculties help you to achieve that.
Okay.
So the faculties, like your heart is there, your spiritual heart's there to know and love Allah. Your aql is there to know Allah. Your nafs is there for you to purify it so you can connect to Allah. So they're all there. They're
Okay.
like tools that help your fitrah to achieve what it's naturally inclined to do. And if the fitrah is, being blocked from what it's naturally meant to do, this is when it can cause internal chaos or internal dilemma for the person.
Yeah, this brings to my mind the concept of ahsan al-taqweem. Like you said, human beings created in this best integrated form, which is made up of parts, but they're all integrated together, that works harmoniously and perfectly. and when it does, we function really well. So when those parts are missing or there's issues with any part, then there's a problem, and that could manifest itself as a physical issue, spiritual issue, or a mental issue. Right?
That's right. And can I add, like, there we have us and Itakwin, we're formed in the creating the best form. But sometimes, again, we kind of start to incline towards thinking, look, if you do everything right, then you're going to be good. But think of it from a physical perspective. You could be a very physically healthy person, but if you live in a place where there's, some toxic thing in the air, like that's poisonous. Asbestos. Let's say asbestos. Yeah. I've done everything right. I do my fitness every day. I jog every day. I eat all the right things. But there's asbestos in that place. You're still going to physically suffer. So I think this is where there are things that we need to do spiritually to make us right. But it's not just about us. I just want us to also highlight that it could be the environment, which Hanan mentioned. It could be the family. It could be genetic inclination. Like some people are prone to heart disease, for example. Some people are prone to certain cancers. So it's much more complex than saying if I do A, B, and C, I'm going to be D.
Can we then say, okay, we said the first thing is there's the way Islam defines human nature and fitrah is unique. That's a contribution or distinction of what Islam brings to Islamic psychology or psychology in general. Secondly, it draws up a standard of human conduct or human being with the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and that is a plus. What would be, can we say the third thing is about the environment? Like what's distinctive about Islamic psychology? What is the third point that we can make there?
Looking to kind of structure it in 3 points, it's still limiting because Islamic psychology integrates all forms of knowledge. So whether it's the theology, whether it's the biological psychology, whether it's the social psychology, whether it's the spiritual psychology, I think trying to bring it down to 3, is limiting to a very all-encompassing discipline that looks at human nature and mental health or mental illness as well.
Well, what you said is great there. Islamic psychology sees knowledge as a whole.
Yeah, exactly.
That it doesn't.
I said that earlier. I said we look at metaphysical, we look at empirical science. So I did say it's all inclusive.
I know. I'm just trying to crystallize, what you're saying into, I guess, points that we can remember and maybe draw from this discussion. That's all.
Or if we wanted to have a take-home message for everyone to remember, study Islamic psychology for your own personal self and personal development. And those who are therapists, study it for your professional development. Yeah,
I totally. Just from an even Islamic spirituality perspective, I think it's so important. Like I talk a lot about the nafs. I think it's such an important aspect of a human being that we need to understand. And I can see the difference between someone who understands their nafs and who doesn't. Like it can make the difference of complete difference in their worldview, a complete difference in the understanding of themselves. So this kind of knowledge is so empowering, studying the nafs or acknowledging the nafs as part of the human being is a key part of Islamic psychology, for example.
And growth, personal human growth. We wouldn't be thriving as mental health professionals within our communities if we weren't delivering a psychology that's meaningful to the Muslim community, and most of our Muslim clients have an expectation that a psychologist of Muslim faith will be able to infuse their narrative, their understanding, their Islam into the intervention, into the understanding of their mental health issues as well.
Okay, Zulaiha mentioned the environment. I think that's really significant. So what does Islam help in that situation? If someone's environment is the cause of their mental health issues, what does Islam do to prevent that? Or if someone falls into that, help them get out of that?
Well, it can help us in being aware to change the environment. So if you're suffering from depression and the root cause of that depression is that you've been being associating with poor associates who may gossip, for example, which is a disease of the heart, and you start to second guess and question yourself to the point where you become depressed, then we're given the remedy, and there's a lot of text about purification of the heart, is to remove yourself from that environment, in order, and from a therapeutic perspective, we would be using, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy. And acceptance and commitment therapy is so key, even in Islam, because we have the concept of accepting things that we cannot change. I mean, we have the 12-step groups, modern, for AA, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, where they have a 12-step group, and they have a concept of accepting the things that you cannot change. And this is also very central to Islam. So exactly. So we accept it, but we also engage in the active principle of sabr, because sabr is not passive. It's actually very active, and because Islam is a very active religion. So we infuse those concepts into our therapies and help them learn how to use them. So it's not just sister or brother, have sabr. This is how you can exercise sabr, or this is how you can, engage in baby steps in order to behave differently, to act differently, to eat differently, to worship, in different ways that's going to help your mental health.
I think this is particularly where Islamic psychology is so important, because there are concepts like, say, gratitude, shukr, but, a lot of the time people don't know how to apply these in their lives, or they struggle with it. So this is where, again, processes or strategies or steps on how they can apply things like shukr, or even tafakkur or mindfulness,
or forgiveness,
and
tawbah. These are all important concepts, and there's even evidence-based science to back that up. There's a lot of research that shows, if you engage in acts of charity, if you engage in acts of forgiveness, provided it's not going to harm your mental health. If you engage in volunteering, if you engage in gratitude, the concept of gratitude diary, for example, there's evidence that shows that it improves your mental health. So that's why I say Islamic psychology and the way we understand Islamic mental health in Islam is very holistic. It integrates all sciences in order to achieve, eventually, better mental health outcomes. And those better mental health outcomes, surely they're there so that we can continue to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is what He asked us to do. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, He only created man and jinn in order to worship Him. That's our sole purpose. And that's what Islamic psychology is all about too. What is our purpose of our functioning in this dunya?
I was going to actually say that that's an important part as well, that Islam gives significance to human beings. That our role, we have a purpose, that we're not just, accidentally created or part of evolution where we just happen to live for a certain time, then we'll disappear forever. It's not just a fleeting life, that our life is important. It just gives us such a strong self-esteem, self-worth, and significance, like we are conscious beings. As in Islamic spirituality, it says like human beings like a minor universe, or if the universe was to reduce in size, it would be like a human being, and if a human being was to expand, it would be universe. It's a bit of a spiritual, metaphysical explanation, but it makes you feel good about being human. It's
true,
and that you're not worthless, and that builds such inner core that makes you more resilient, doesn't it?
It does, and it really does. I mean, even with the fitrah, like Hannah had mentioned, the fitrah is about you're good, you're inherently good. And I think that makes a huge difference when a person has internalized that, to think, I am an inherently good being, creation. Allah has created me in the best of we said, in the best of composition. That says a lot as well. It's like you've got this, I always say that we've got like a spiritual DNA, so it has to be unraveled. It has to be activated. And to know that, it's so empowering and so positive.
And this is better than telling somebody you have to love yourself. You know how people do that? Just love yourself. But it could be delusional, that kind of a thing. But as you described it, it says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created me good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves me, and then that gives you a anchor other than yourself, and that's far stronger. And
yeah. And I think what's important to continue on what you both said is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we are the best of creation, and if you look at our faculties, for example, we have higher order cognition, we have imagination, creativity. Animals do not have these faculties. Animals do not have imagination. They can't think. They rely on instinct. We have instinct too. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the same qualities as animals. But then if you look beyond that, you look at angels, for example. Angels have higher order consciousness. We don't know what the makeup of that is, but we know from the Quran that the angels had questioned Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they asked Allah why he would create human beings, Adam, that's good, and we're beings who will create mischief on earth. So they can question, but they have no free will. So animals have no free will either. So angels have to do whatever Allah orders them to do. Animals only can rely on instincts, but we've got free will. We have the capacity to do what is right, what is wrong. We have the capacity to alienate ourselves from our fitrah or reconnect with our fitrah. So we've got these faculties that Allah has blessed us, gifted us with, but that's not to deny. And I don't want to present this. So
what's the significance of that?
Can I just touch, because I know there might be people who are listening who might be thinking, okay, well, they're not perfect because they've strayed, they've done wrong. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has recognized that we are forgetful human beings. We make mistakes. We do err. Okay, we're given remedies to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you do err, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all forgiving. He's all merciful, and we need to recognize that and accept that as well. Sorry, your question.
I guess these are great because you're a clinical psychologist. How does this translate into actual clinical work? Can you give us some examples of how you incorporate these into your practice?
Yeah, so if I had a client who is feeling worthless and hopeless, which are features or symptoms of depression, they're not eating properly, they're either overeating, undereating, they haven't gone to work, their sleep is disturbed, they do not enjoy things that they used to enjoy. We call this anhedonia. Their memory is impaired, they're forgetful, and so forth. I remind them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stipulated we are going to go through hardships. There might be temporary, there might be long term, but also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests those that he loves. So I bring in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all loving. I'm not saying I don't introduce punishment concepts in therapy. Never. I never introduce punishment because therapy is supposed to be safe. You're supposed to connect. You're not going to connect with your client if you're going to introduce God-fearing concepts, because they're already getting that from their communities or their families or so forth. So I infuse a positive, innate fitrah way, to help them know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all loving. And then I introduce activities for them to do that's going to help them with, come out of the depression slowly. It might be, okay, brother, go to the mosque, just one of the prayers a day. Because what will happen when he goes to the mosque? When he goes to the mosque, he'll see people he may know. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. He'll feel good about himself spiritually. He'll engage socially, because social connection is a buffer to mental health issues, especially depression. Pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in congregate in together. Now I'm tongue-tied because I love this topic, and that way when you're praying together, you're going to feel spiritually within the ummah.
I can't imagine another psychologist say these things, an non-Muslim psychologist.
And then on your way out, if you're well off, contribute to the donation box, because giving in charity helps you as well. And this is evidence-based. Not only does it help you spiritually, but psychologically, science has shown that this is actually helpful. This is what I would tell someone who's depressed, because you need to activate your body, you need to activate your mind, but in small steps. And
your intention should be pure. You should purify your intention so that you're negating the nafs, so the person detaches from that.
You want them to connect to Allah. And if they're not praying at all, I say, okay, don't go to the mosque. Just try one prayer in the day. Baby steps. Don't hold them to account.
What's the reaction?
They find it, honestly, they find it very profound, because I'm not judgmental. Clinicians or mental health workers, in general, you shouldn't be judgmental, because we're not the reader of hearts, but But we're told that we have to give nasiha. We have to give good counsel. You have to provide information that's going to benefit the person who's seeking your help. You don't have to be a psychologist to give nasiha, but you have to be a genuinely inclined to want to help them. Use the information we have from our deen, use whatever information you have from that's going to help you improve their mental health, and then roll with that.
Do they feel like you're pushing religion to these patients?
No, because I generally will try and understand spiritually where my clients are coming from, because generally in our intake we will have, do you identify with a particular religion and spirituality? And in my intake I will try and gather with consent if they want
you assess the
yes, that's right.
situation.
Because we do things with consent. We also have to make sure that the therapy space is safe, because sometimes they're angry with Allah. They don't want religion. They don't want you to discuss Allah, and I don't. I wait until they feel safe with me. They can connect with me. They can see I'm a Muslim they can identify with, and then slowly I will impart Islamic information into the therapy, which they are then ready to receive. Okay?
That's very good. So basically you are harmonizing the contemporary methods of clinical methods, which may be secular or seen as secular, with Islamic teachings, concepts.
No, my principles are founded on Islamic principles.
Okay.
And then I'm drawing upon information from wherever that is suitable for my client. So I individualize the therapy, but it's founded on Islamic principles.
Okay. So
Can I just say something with regards to that? Like, because you said I can't imagine another psychologist doing that. I think there are probably a few. Maybe they're all in your centre, Psych Central.
I just meant, a non-Muslim
I just
psychologist.
wanted to, but even my point was, even with Muslim psychologists, others that I have spoken to, maybe especially the younger ones, they really struggle in this space, I find. Like, even if they know the knowledge, like bringing it into their practice seems to be a big struggle. It could be also because when they went to university, where you think you're going to learn it all, religion, spirituality was not part of that training. Bringing those two worlds together seems to be a big problem and struggle, and they don't have the confidence to do it.
Which is why we designed the course.
They should do the course.
Yes, exactly right. Because I think we developed a really unique way in being able to infuse, the Islamic theological understanding of who we are as human beings, and spirituality as well, but also incorporating mental health. And I think that, again, you don't have to be a clinician to do this course, but if you can look at it as professional and personal development. I was saying to Zalaiha earlier many times that this course is meant to be self-transformative, because you can take a lot away for your own self. You don't have to be a clinician. You can be a chaplain. You can be a teacher. You can be a community leader or a religious leader as well. But the content not only helps yourself, but it can help others around you, because we're an ummah. We are on this dunya not only to help ourselves and connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also help others also connect and reconnect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
All right, the course we're talking about is Graduate Certificate in Islamic Psychology, offered through Charles Sturt University. We'll put a link to the description if anyone's interested. Zulaiha, my question to you is, you don't come from the clinical aspect, but I'm sure you spoke with individuals in your teaching capacity who were having maybe mental health issues, like from a counseling perspective. What was your experience? What is your experience like? Where did you think like you helped from a religious perspective, and at some point you said, "Sister, you need some psychologist to help you. I can't help you anymore."
Yeah. Look,
what's the point there?
It's hard finding that, identifying a point, but there are, and maybe we need to be, and this is where Muslim community leaders need to be better informed and know when to refer, to a mental health professional. But so it's not that easy to identify, I think. Sometimes it is. And sometimes you just, you get to a point where you think, this is beyond a conversation about faith, about spirituality, that you need, I guess, professional help.
When does that come? Like, when is the point?
It's hard to give a point. I guess if you're seeing serious problems, like for me, I would say if I'm seeing concerns with, the everyday functioning, if I see that that's a problem, if they're not interacting or integrating into society that well. So these, or if I'm thinking that they've had trauma particularly, so I guess you look for those kind of red flags when you do.
I had experience.
Having said that, though, it isn't easy always to get people to go to see a psychologist in the Muslim community, and I guess that's where we need to try to evaluate what we try to give out nasiha, like you mentioned, about worldview, sabr, shukr, what all these concepts you try to use. You do refer, but you don't always. People won't always go, so you have to try to do your best. Assuming that maybe they won't seek the help that they need, because a lot of people probably go through life without seeking the help that they should have.
Yeah, in my experience, I kind of had a number of cases like that where I tried to help a person, and we would just sit down and talk for hours. But I find that we're just repeating the same things, even though we're spending a lot of time. The person's unable to get out of a particular mindset or a behavior pattern. Then I say, well, I can't. I'm not able to help this person. It's just too serious. It just requires some help. Either psychiatrist or psychologist needs to come in therapy.
But can I just add there? Yes, you refer them, but you need to. Remaining connected whilst they get the help is so important, because they will see their mental health professional, doesn't have to be a psychologist, for about 50 minutes, whether it's once a week, once every fortnight, then they're left alone. That alone is the most important time for them to get that support. And often it's with their family, friends, community, and so forth, because one of the best buffers of mental health issues is connection to other people. We can't discount connection, which is why also connection to your spirituality, connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also a buffer. That's why we infuse Islamic spirituality, because it acts as a buffer to further deterioration of mental health issues.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we had a really good discussion. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about in this aspect that we didn't get an opportunity?
I guess one thing, we're talking about how these things help. I would love to see more research in this space, I guess.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Particularly like, for example, one of our students, she's looking at post-traumatic growth, and she interviewed Muslim women to see what role faith played in that growth. So to me, that's very important, because that research shows how, say, 25 women and it's specifically about domestic violence, who've gone through domestic violence, and how they've used how their faith has benefited them in their growth and their healing. So that kind of information then will benefit others. Making that sort of data analysis would make it beneficial for others. So those kind of research, I think, is very important. Like, Hanan mentioned how, giving charity is shown to improve your mental health. She can confidently say that because someone's researched it and measured someone's mental health before and after they've given charity. We need more such data in a data-driven world.
And some of these things that we talked about are contentions, and they should be backed with research as well. Like, you could do research of people who are praying. I guess, what does that do to their mental well-being as opposed to others who are not praying, if possible? Things
exactly.
like that.
All these things, reading Quran, do it. Someone reads for 10 pages a day for 1 month. What impact does this have? And obviously, as a researcher, you would have to be able to consider the variables that are involved.
You have to have a control group.
You would have to have a control group, but these are things that are doable and are done in research.
I'm actually in the Sydney University Ethics Committee, and half of the research we get every month is about psychology. It's a very well-researched field. But
it's also a very subjective field. If I can come in and say, we're known in psychology, to be very subjective in our research, and that needs to improve. But what I would say as a final comment from myself is that there needs to be more collaboration among psychologists, religious leaders, religious organisations to understand mental health, which will help us understand Islamic psychology better, but then also to reduce the stigma of understanding mental health and mental illness as well. So we're not at that stage where we've collaborated well enough to have a healthy society that has a high level of emotional and psychological well-being. If there's more collaboration within our religious leaders and academics and psychologists, because I don't know everything. I'm a clinical psych and I'm pretty much self-taught in Islamic psychology. I've been to a lot of classes and courses, but we need a lot more classical Islamic scholarship and understanding and theology to better understand Islamic psychology as well.
Yeah. There's only a handful of books on this field, Islamic psychology. Definitely we need more.
That's right.
And not only research books, but also you're saying that this should be recognized as an issue within the Muslim community and communities.
Yes.
And that we need to have an open discussion and handling this. It may affect a big part of our community. Even though if someone is not, in a situation of saying, I got to go see a psychologist, but people may have mental health related or mental well-being related issues that can be addressed in a mosque setting or a different community settings. So who should be doing this graduate certificate on Islamic psychology? Who should, in your view?
Generally, I would say it should be open to everybody or anyone who wants to understand themselves.
It's open to anyone,
Yeah, it's open to everyone.
So who?
But more specifically, those who are in the professions where they engage with people, like mental health professionals, chaplains, especially when they're dealing with emotional
counselors, social workers,
the emotional well-being, because even the one of the key subjects is a very applied approach to Islamic psychology. So we teach you and give examples on how to use the Islamic principles and concepts in providing nasiha or counselling.
Excellent. Do you want to add to that?
No, I agree. I mean, just because I communicate a lot with students who are doing it and who have, and I think the self-transformative that I've heard a number of students who have said that it has transformed them, and it's one of those things where it transforms them at a personal level, but then they're able to give back and use those skills for other, professionally, whether it's as a teacher. We have quite a few teachers, mental health professionals, but even with your children, because we're talking about how to give nasiha, and we're always giving nasiha, for example, to our children. Understanding how to do it in the most effective, most powerful way can really influence our relationship with the loved ones around us. So it's really beneficial to anyone who wants to know themselves and who wants to grow as a person.
Yeah, so basically anyone who's interested in this graduate certificate of Islamic psychology, it's the pioneering course in the world. There are other Islamic psychology kind of classes, courses, but this is the first university level postgraduate award. So we are really proud that we've been able to launch that. Thank you very much, Hanan, for joining the podcast.
Most welcome.
Thank you, Zulaya.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.